So I am Molly Bourne, and I'm a principal at MNLA in New York City. I have been thinking about this lecture quite a bit, mostly because I'm thinking about November and students and how stressful it can be in November for students. And so I really appreciate your time and the fact that this is a tough part of the semester. So I thought today what I would do was to talk about process. And so not talk about projects in regard to the end, but talk about 3 projects and talk about a certain point in each project that talks about the design process, so that that's something that you can think about, and also maybe might be relevant to something that you're working on now that you may have final, designs to work on in what I hear is 4 weeks. So I really love the design process. I was taught it very formally, but it's really, something that can always help guide you through problem solving. And so that's what I'd like to do today. But a little bit about me. So I grew up in a big family in Maryland and have really spent most of my life on the East Coast. I consider myself now a New Yorker, where I'm talking to you from today in Lower Manhattan. But I really love the coastal plain, I say. I really love that whole edge. I went to school at the University of Florida and have been practicing landscape architecture for now 30 years. I got my BLA in the early 90s, and there wasn't any internet then. And it was a very different time, but also a really interesting time because I got out of school during a recession. And so because I got out of school in the recession, I was happy to get a job at an engineering firm. And that engineering firm really taught me a lot of technical skills, but I was kind of starved for creativity. And so although I was doing some really interesting site planning and grading, I was looking for something that would be more creative. So I started to realize that I should learn other software and learn how to do AutoCAD and do Adobe. And then also I started to volunteer at the Neighborhood Design Center in Baltimore, Maryland. It was great because it made me realize that I wanted to work in public open space and to help communities and to use my skills to help people realize what they want for their shared space. And so this is a drawing from 1992 that I did by hand. I think it might be ink on Mylar. Again, everything was hand lettered. I was really a drafter at first, but then learned how to really kind of find other ways to draw and to communicate. And so that type of creativity, I think, is important for you to understand that you can find it almost anywhere. And sometimes if sometimes your job is not getting that for you, then you can find other outlets to either in volunteer work or in cooking or in writing. So it's important to keep that creativity alive and to keep that going. So also, a lot of times you'll have a job that you won't love. And so you have to make the best or learn the most from it and then find other things from it. So, I'd like to talk to you about my firm too, MNLA. So we have been in business, we're a women-owned business. We've been in business now for 28 years. We have a focus, we've had a focus of public open space. And while most of that work ranges from Buffalo all the way to Atlanta, we have a strong practice in the New York City and New York area. We've been part of some really wonderful New York City projects like Governor's Island, which you're seeing, Little Island. We love islands and piers. And this is on the west side of Manhattan. And so then also, the project that I started, Mathews Nielsen, was the Buffalo Inner Harbor. This is Canal Side, which was about rewatering the Erie Canal slip. And the project changed through its length because they found archaeology. But what I learned was kind of how to make some big moves on this, but also to really think about detailing and how the historic character can be seen in the details of it. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. So we have a very broad practice, and I think the idea of it was really about how to be part of that dialogue of public space, which is very important to us. And then much of our work has a focus on planting. This is the Audubon, the Theodore Roosevelt Audubon Center that's out in Long Island. Nadja did a rendering for us years ago, and actually it looks just like this. This is about creating demonstration gardens for neighborhoods so they could understand how they could create their own pollinator gardens. We did a ton of research on this, and we're really happy the way it came out. Many people use it. We also really love projects that connect communities, like this is Randall's Island Connector. The idea of it really being, part of the fabric of city life, urban life, and also that people are able to have equity in regard to access. That's another very important aspect of our practice. And so we have created this kind of a statement because it's important for us together as a firm to create this idea about our values and what our core values are. So we have decided that we're going to write it down and we're going to say it a lot, and very much different generation than what I was, the way I came up, but it's always inspires me to reread it. And I always, when I'm looking at work, I'm looking at it through this lens. So it's the idea of being an advocate for connected communities and ecological design, and then really about transformation of those landscapes. And so we really think that that's an important aspect that we want to be part of. I've been very lucky that I've really learned by doing, I would say. I have worked my way up from production to project manager, to design director, to partner. My mentors, Kim Mathews and Signe Nielsen, were my bosses, are now my partners. Kim retired in 2018, and I've been a partner since 2013. I really became a partner because I wanted to understand what we were pursuing and like the idea that we could elevate design within the firm. And that has been a real interesting challenge. I also am joined by my partner, Rob DeMarco, who's the managing partner. So we're happy to lead this office. It's been a challenge and also incredibly satisfying. And I have feel like that I learned so much from the people I work with, because the thing to know is that it's really important to work with people that inspire you and also challenge you creatively. And so this is us doing some outreach work in Kingsbridge with the community, where we worked during COVID, obviously, to really work with the community to help clean up and also help them create this mural. So that heart of working with communities is at the heart of our practice. So again, that's a little bit about our firm. I'm sure you guys can ask other questions later. So I want to make sure, so the one thing that I wanted to talk about is collaboration. So all of the projects that you'll see subsequently and all of the work that you see is done by a huge team, and there's teams inside and out. It's important to acknowledge that at one point in time, there was kind of the thinking that one genius created these projects, but it's not that at all. There's huge teams of important sub-consultants, consultants, specialists that all come together and collaborate and create spaces, public spaces. And especially now, it's important to understand the role of resiliency, sustainability, and as projects get more complex, the need for collaboration is greater and greater. So I really enjoy working. I always joke around with my students, because I teach at the University of Pennsylvania, that don't hate me, that I like to work. I kind of learned a little bit about work-life balance. I'm getting better, but I've come late to it. So I think that's why I'm a lifelong learner, and that's why I teach at Penn 2 days a week in the fall, because I feel like I learn as much from the students as I do, as they do for me. So again, what I'd like to do, so that's a little bit about me and my practice and what I'm doing and what I value. And so what I'd like to do is to take you through 3 projects, and those 3 projects will touch on, the first one will touch on discovery and research in the analysis phase. And then the second is testing solutions about creating a concept through the public process, and then creating alternatives that give the community a lot of different ideas and a different kind of outcome. And it's an important aspect that I feel like that many students need to learn, that it's important to have that type of iteration. And then the last one is about refine and strengthen, and the idea that you have a concept and then you're able to take that concept, make decisions, and look at some of the details of a project and have them reflect that concept. So I'm going to go through 3 projects, and with that, okay, everybody ready? It's hard not to just have you guys just talking. So I'll make sure to introduce each one as we go. So the first one, I'm going to take some water. Sparkling water, always for me. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is the Essex Hudson Greenway. And this is a project that is it starts in Montclair and it goes to Jersey City. It's a 9-mile trail. We received the project when it was actually the alignment was done, and what we received was basically a line on a piece of paper. And that line on that piece of paper, that alignment, took 3 years of communities and nonprofits working together with government agencies to create an alignment. And so we were approached to look at this, to how we could create a framework plan so that the community could be engaged, and also that that future and community engagement could understand what to do. So it wasn't a master plan. We were just before the master plan, really a framework plan. And so it actually is kind of challenging not to do, we did a little bit of design, but not a ton. What we did was a ton of analysis, synthesis, and then communicating what it could be, what it had the potential to be. So this is the line, this green line starts in Montclair, and this is New Jersey. And so, of course, being a New Yorker, I'm always focused on the other side, which is New York. New York's on this side, this is Jersey City. And so it's an incredible, what it was an old railroad line, the Bourne line, that actually had been put out of commission for 20 years. So it sat. And so one of the most important aspects of this project was for us to really get to know the site. And so for me, the idea of getting to know the site, the key is really walking and really being in the site. And so I'm going to take you through a bunch of pictures of what it looked like. And then we're going to talk about how we turn that into drawings and diagrams, and then eventually renderings. So the idea is, one thing about this project is it has 30 bridges. And so those bridges are sometimes underpasses, sometimes they're overpasses, but they're kind of amazing, and from all different eras. We had a very important specialist on our team. This project was during COVID. It really only took 5 months, but we walked all of these bridges. That one shot, I thought I was gonna like die and fall off the bridge. But it really made you understand that parts of this, you would be on the bridge and you would get amazing views of the space. So that was one part that really inspired us. And then the western end in Montclair, this area was very suburban. And it looked like, as if it looked like a ghost town, someone left. And right beyond each side of this, there are houses. But you can't see them because everything, the nature and ecology have come back in and kind of overgrown. So this western end has like a suburban woodland feel. And as I'm going from west to east, and we traverse through a little bit more urban in Newark, and sometimes the rail is actually in industrial backyards where actually people have encroached on the property. And again, sometimes you're much higher than industry, and you're elevated. And then as you go through these small towns, then you kind of come to this big threshold that is the meadowlands, and you kind of come under the infrastructure. If you've ever seen the opening song and credits to The Sopranos, that's what this feels like. It's just like amazing expanse of the meadowlands, and a lot of rock. And so when you're out there, you feel like nobody else has been out here before but a train and lots of birds. And so it was we felt like there was such potential in the meadowlands, and especially where adjacencies ecology was coming in, and they were looking for some adjacencies to really re-knit together the very fragmented nature, and a lot of infrastructure that crossed it. So it really somewhat told the story of infrastructure in New Jersey, which was really fascinating. So we spent a lot of time on site, we did a lot of documentation, and then of course we jumped into creating some of these GIS diagrams, which I'm sure that you guys know how to do. They're not that beautiful, right? They're kind of beautiful, but they don't, for an average layperson, they don't tell you much. Or it's very difficult to do a takeaway. And so we started to realize, like, how could we create a framework plan that inspired people? How could we kind of stew down everything in order for it to be inspirational? We felt like we did a lot of good analysis, but then we had to kind of change the tempo and really start to look at, like, where were these very important points, and what did they look like? What did they feel like? And really did a ton of documentation. This was just when COVID was starting, and we did this was like our first time on Miro. And then you can see we were sketching, and you can see people are sketching and taking pictures and sending it from their coffee tables. But we really started to look at, like, where those potentials were and what we could do to really have so someone didn't just see a green line on a plan, that they could actually experience it, and what would it look like. One of the important things is that these are these little sections. So from walking it, we started to do these little sections, and they would always be by the mile. So you can start to see how sometimes the tracks are kind of below, sometimes they're above, other times they're at grade. And so that was an important step for us to understand the width of the space. And so one of the incredible aspects of this 9-mile trail is its width. It has, sometimes it's 100 feet wide, and sometimes even wider. So we look at that as like an incredible opportunity, and the idea that you're sometimes very immersed, and other times you have a kind of view out. So it was important for us to be able to explain that with this simple diagram. And so we started to go away from the GIS expression to these very simple diagrams that start to talk about, like, the idea that this 9 miles has this many bridges that are either over or underpasses, and this is what they look like. It has one of, like, 2 pretty famous bridges in regard to the way that they work. One is it turns by steam. And it's an incredible, all the bridge people that were involved in it were so in love with it. But so we had to estimate how much it might cost to fix them, which is really through the roof these days. But again, they're very special moments. But also what is also incredibly special is there's a lot of history along the trail. So by, again, creating this kind of line with these ideas of where those moments are, we really thought that that would be a way to kind of people imagine what you could do in that space. And then really understanding the ecological gradient. We did a ton of research and what that meant, but then how could you kind of stew that down into, you have an upland woodlands, one's like industrial, and then a very maritime, and then the last part is very altered. It's very impacted by construction. And so those allow for us to think about what the approaches might be. And then making sure that we did a ton, probably 18 diagrams went into making this diagram, so it was very clear you could understand where we had existing connections that could start right away or that needed to be done in the future, and when they were adjacent to parks. And then, of course, did a ton of research for habitat and resiliency, and what type of habitat we could either introduce or enhance or restore. and then thought about all the different types of users. Because it's 9 miles, you can imagine that it could be used locally and also by the neighborhood, and then regionally. Many people who live in Montclair could ride their bike to Jersey City, hop on on public transit, and then go to New York City or to Hoboken. And so it's an important connector. And we started to imagine what all of those places look like. And so in order to really get this ready for the community, what we realized was that we could break this down into experiences and really describe that. And we decided to do everything at this part by hand, so that these sketches looked like that you could see the space and you could imagine it, but it wasn't designed yet. And so then we took it a little further and we started to add program. This is the Newark section. And so see, Newark section is really wide. And so we started to look at what type of opportunities a program could be. So then that could be the beginning conversation with the community. And so then, of course, we did some lovely renderings so you can imagine it. And some of these are taken from the images that I showed you in the beginning. And so this is the suburban woodland. This is Newark, where it's more expansive, thinking very heavily on stormwater and how to do that. Is it possible to do solar lighting, which we're having some success in New York City? And then at these bridges, what that view is and what that prow is and how those create those gateways. And especially this very unique space and the adjacent kind of uses that could happen in the Meadowlands. And so all of that was kind of like a stewing down of 4 months or so of analysis, and then taking it into this idea of a graphic package so that it could be explained to agencies. And we were fortunate enough to find out that that was used in order for New Jersey to buy the land. And so now it's actually in RFQ for which is called request for qualifications, and they're trying to take it to the master plan phase. So that's been fun. I'm going to talk to you about the second one. I think I'm doing okay for time. This is really about testing solutions. And so this is Pier 42. It's a master plan that we were doing right after Sandy. It's in the Lower East Side of New York. And most of the projects I'm showing you after this are pretty urban. It's about 8 acres. It's in first phase of construction right now. And so you can think of it as, we're in Lower Manhattan, you can think of this edge. Here we are as the East River. And so there's Brooklyn Bridge, Manhattan Bridge, and Williamsburg. It always goes BMW. It's the easiest way to remember it. So you have this post-industrial edge, and then you have a very long recreation edge for about 1.25 miles. And so the idea that Pier 42 is right in the center of that, it had a special nexus. And this is what it kind of looks like. It used to be a pier for where people would bring in bananas. It actually was until like the 80s. If you had a banana from a bodega in New York, it came through Pier 42. And so that was all decommissioned, and it was very still post-industrial. So the idea of like the amount of green space in the Lower East Side, it's kind of actually quite low for the density of people that live there. It's very underserved. It's actually improving, and it's improved since this project started. But this idea of where could you really create that green space? And so this missing link on the kind of Greenway was important to think about. You can think about it here. This is Lower Manhattan, and parts of this were either under construction or incomplete. And so this felt like a missing link. And the idea, the other thing that's really important that we work with, and there's so many stories you can tell with a project. And so I'm going to focus on design. There are many parts of this. We could talk about flooding, talk about resiliency, sustainability, but I'm going to focus on the design and some of the challenges, the technical challenges that led to the design. So this diagram illustrates the one point of access, which was an issue, and then also it's a very skinny piece of land. And that skinny piece of land is an upland, but the part that's over water is a big pier shed. And one section of it is owned by the Department of Transportation, that's DOT. We have a tendency to use way too many acronyms, so you can always put them in the chat if you don't know. So this site was really looked at, it was owned by the New York Parks Department, and then eventually was handed over to EDC, and it's been going back and forth between the two. But it was really it was a Parks Department project. And so we went through extensive outreach on this project. And the outreach really surprisingly led to the programming. The community wanted to make sure that they had much more ideas about ecology and access than wanting a lot more program, because it was adjacent to very kind of 2 miles of active recreation. What they wanted was where all families could come, where they could, see the water, get close to the water, and really have much more about ecology, because they were really thinking about what a very difficult time and trauma that they went through with Hurricane Sandy. So this is all the outreach, and this is the way we did it. We did it through ballots. You can see some of our staff here that are still here that worked very hard on this project. But what won was, after like many different meetings for outreach, what won was this idea of river ecology. And so how could that really be the design concept that we took forward, and allow the kind of Parks Department not to put it full of athletic fields, but to really think about what it could be. So the idea is that this is this beautiful line diagram that kind of talks about the concept of this very straight edge and this kind of idea of nature coming in, and what is that exchange? And so this is like, can this happen on Pier 42? So what I'm going to show you is 2 concepts and 1 hybrid, which was the resulting master plan. And so the first concept starts, and again, they all have this idea of what's the big idea is river ecology. And one of the big constraints on this project is the fact you have to keep this road and bikeway on every, you had to keep it, maintain it, and that it had to stay at grade. So the idea is that this would be that you'd have a very big lawn, and that you would put in a playground and a beach here, and then you would have a marsh here. You'd have this kind of node of where the water and boardwalk would come in. And so this idea of breaking the edge and creating a much more kind of fluid edge along a waterfront was something that we were experimenting with at this time and have kind of taken forward. But the edge of these waterfronts are very regulated. So this concept really just looked at it in a very conservative way. And many linear parks, one of the most important things is the circulation, and how the spaces hang off that kind of all these different strands of circulation, especially in these narrows. So this is the circulation for this concept 1. And then the idea that you would cut sections through and understand what this would look like. And again, all of this, the 100-year storm was important to understand where that was. How could we create kind of a berm so you'd have a little bit of height, and keep certain things out of the floodplain, and then keep the entire deck here. And so you can see the 2 little section lines. So this is concept 1. And this is more like a programming diagram of that. So it's kind of a bigger space. It has kind of that soft edge, but it's got a lot more program on this end. And so then the second concept, which really influenced the kind of final concept, was this idea of breaking the edge, and to really create a stronger river promenade here, and to create this as an island. You would nestle in the playground here and make sure that you had 2 big lawn hills. Instead of having 1 lawn hill, you separate them, and then you keep the marsh here. But one of the reasons why this was broken was that we found out that the deck had a lot of structural issues. So it had the potential to really, maybe turn a constraint into a positive. So maybe we could kind of chew away at that deck. And so this again, this is the circulation diagram. And instead, there's kind of like you move out to the island and you're along the water is the major move, while also creating different strands of circulation within. And then you can start to see the difference with the get rid of that, with the way that the deck is broken and the water comes in. You can see that a little bit more clearly in the sections. I'm a big fan of sections. And so then what this might look like is how this lays out, and the idea of, could you take that really interesting banana kind of shed structure, and kind of pull the skin off of it, paint it, and see what it could have, what it could be. It could be a home base and an area for activity, and then really have a much more ecological edge. So that was what happened in the idea of this. And so people came back to the idea of, could you make the lawn, actually, could you make it and mash it up and have a lawn here and here, and then really have this as a very soft edge, and have the water come in. And it was much more about creating a wetland and creating a soft edge. So you would enter in and see that. And so again, you're completely separated from that. And so you feel like you're out on a pier in the East River. And then these are these very simple sketches about, you would come from the promenade and you would see the marsh right away. You'd have a hill on the right and an island on the left. And what that would feel like would have that very strong feel of ecology and more nature. And then how do you kind of take people along? That's the opposite, where you're really bringing water into and then having a bridge to the island. And really thinking about this more as a barrier island, which, you know, parts of it are, and the idea of that it could really change, and that the channel could have a different fixture feeling, especially during different tides. The tide changes here, I don't know, 5 or 6 feet every day. And so we would see where it would come out and come in. So it was an important part of this. And so this was the final concept for Pier 42 for the master plan. And so you can see there are large lawns, which everybody loves a lawn. We've taken the idea of it's a much more kind of fluid and braided experience. And then there's also this idea of like using the pier again, but a much smaller one. So this becomes kind of the final design for the master plan, and really influenced the first phase. This was estimated, and the project was pretty expensive and took a long time for the regulatory. But they have funded the first phase. And so these are some of the renderings to describe the experience of the master plan and what that might feel. There's that soft edge and the promenade, the waterfront promenade. And this is the idea of kind of using the kind of shed and then painting it red, which is actually, this is the picture of it right now. And so this is the phase 1 that is just under construction now, and there's a temporary playground there. But it's that type of kind of exploration in the concept stage really led to a really strong first phase and also a future master plan. So that's something that I think is important to encourage. Although you're seeing a lot of final drawings, that much of this was about collaboration and thinking about how can you push and pull the site and really think about what are different, real different versions to give the community different ideas about what they want. So that's Pier 42. And so then I'm going to go into my last one, which is about the project Waterline Square. And so this is a very urban project. This is on the west side of Manhattan. It's about 3 acres of open space. The construction was completed in 2020. And so we started the project in 2006 and it was completed in 2020. So 14 years. And so public work takes a long time to realize. You have to have a lot of tenacity and patience, but it usually is worth it. So this project, again, here we are. Here's the Hudson River on the left. And so this is Columbus Circle. If you understand Manhattan, this is Lincoln Center is here, and this is Central Park. And so we had this edge of Manhattan is called Riverside South. It was master planned years ago and went through many, many different hands in regard to real estate development. And so this site here it used to be a train depot. It had a lot of an industrial past, but it was one of the last pieces of Riverside Center to be developed. So this is like the idea of a super block in Manhattan is this idea of, you can see other ones. You can see here between Amsterdam and West End, that's a super block. And so the idea of having this kind of impenetrable super block, we were really fighting against this. And so one of the idea that's really important about this is to connect 60th Street all the way through, to not make this a block where the grid hits it like it does here. In 62nd, it just hits it. But we wanted 60th Street to go all the way through to the river, because below you have Hudson, you have all of the Hudson River Park, sorry, and then above is Riverside Park. So we wanted the people that lived here able to get there. And so that corridor was important. And then how could you bring that park-like environment into Riverside Center? So you're just thinking about these as kind of bigger concepts, and how you really could create a neighborhood here. At the time we were doing it, there wasn't really much on 11th Avenue except for car dealerships. And so that's changed quite a bit, but how could you really bring the idea of Central Park all the way through to Riverside Center / Waterline Square? And so these are these concepts about bringing in the 60th Street corridor, and then really how could you dissolve the grid in the space? Because the space goes from the edge of what feels like the urban grid, and then it hits really the river. So it's this dissolution of urban to nature, and then really bringing back the park in. So these diagrams really informed us. Plus, the other thing that was really important was this diagram, which is in the master planning stage, we did this project with Christian Portson Park, who is out of Paris, where everything is the same height. And the idea of the buildings was how could they be at different heights, have different massings. What we were inspired was this little stream that, they laid over the grid of Manhattan, and that they didn't kind of pay attention to topography or streams, but there was this little stream on site that had been lost and was pre-settlement stream. But it was always our inspiration. This project wasn't called Waterline Square when we started, it was called Riverside Center. But this stream became a transect for many ideas. And so I'm going to show you how that is realized and kind of seen in some of the elements. But so this diagram really kind of stayed in our minds and helped us really meet all of our detailing and thinking through this project. Because again, there's 5 buildings through here, and the streets come through, the grid comes through. There's a big highway here, but the idea, we went from having 1 master plan architect to 5 architects and 3 different developers. But so the most important thing was for us to create this plaza, this kind of heart of the plaza that met that 60th Street grid. And then create a very good direct connection to the park. And how we could do that. We really looked at the form and how you're really coming off of the Manhattan grid and it starts to break down. And the plaza is the beginning of that. And the other thing about this site is the idea that you create that view corridor all the way through, but that you're also seeing something that's leading you to the river. And so here's the 3D model of it. The idea that you're creating a lawn, but then you're kind of breaking this down and breaking the space down, working with the architect where he folded back a lot of the buildings so that it feels more expansive. Technically, this project was really challenging. There was definitely a lot of sunlight issues because these are very tall towers. And the other aspect of this is it's very, very windy. And so the idea that we would make sure that we could deal with both of those issues and make plants grow was important. Also, lots of grade change. This corner down here is 8, and this corner is much higher. It's like in the almost 27. And so you have to lose that grade change. And if any of your architects, I'm not picking on you, but architects like when things are flat. And landscape architects are like, how can we make sure that the building really nestles into the landscape? So this was a really interesting challenge, and you can start to see that in the design. And so the idea would be that we kind of really stepped down and made this as porous as possible, so that although you may not be able to live in one of these buildings, you could actually come and play here. This is a public open space for everyone. And it's actually very well loved by the neighborhood now. but that you felt welcome. You didn't feel like you were trespassing or that you couldn't come in and play in the fountain. So really keeping this edges as porous as possible and make it feel inclusive was very important to us. And so the one aspect of this was the water, and the idea of that the water acted like a transect that expressed the idea of the dissolution of the grid to kind of the river. So you can see this is a sketch. Actually, this is Greg Leonard's sketch. He's incredibly talented. And you can start to see how the water starts here, moves through, and then goes through the site. The idea that it would be very kind of playful, and then it would be a bit reflective, and then part of what we call the riparian area. And so again, that was the sketch. The idea is it's a little bit more formalized. Again, starts here where it's much more lively, moves through the site, and then there's the kind of thing that draws you down the 60th Street is that large plaza fountain. And so that they have different feels. Again, the plaza is very active, the water channel is much more passive, and then this idea that this could be, the cascade is sensory because it's next to a highway. It's a little bit louder, a little bit more, trying to create more of a garden space. And so these are some of the renderings that we did, really looking at what that might look like, and started to play with, could you create a fountain that had different rooms? We had a great fountain consultant, and really studied what the context was, like how big did this need to be in relationship to this big building? And studied it in 3Ds, and then really played around with what the rooms looked like. We were very inspired by Jeppe Hein's project in Amsterdam, and then looked at it 9 ways to Sunday, really then also like how it could lay out, and because, you know, make it very useful. There was wind issues, and so studied really what the dimensions are and what was the right size. And so again, renderings change, and then this is actually the project. This is the site in use in the summer, which I think that the spillway works pretty well. And so then the second one that I want to talk to you about relatively quickly for Waterline is the planting. So the planting also is an expression of this idea of going from urban to nature. And so this idea of that you have a lawn, but then there's a meadow and this kind of riparian cascade that moves through it. Just PS, by the way, this project is all on structure. The entire site, 2 acres, most of it is on structure. It's not on terra firma, it's over top of a garage. So one of the things that was very difficult was to make sure that we had enough soil for plants. And so you can see that this is us studying all of the tops of slabs in relationship to the walls so that we have enough depth for planting. So then you're kind of like, you're always adding in that technical, but then also thinking about bigger picture and what is actually the planting doing. So some of the first sketches we did were, how do you experience the pathway system? Very simple sketches that says, okay, in the meadow, you're going to be kind of at grade, right? And then the idea that when you're in the conifer area, it's a little more immersive and the pathway is recessed. And then when you're actually in what we call riparian, which is closer to the river, then it's elevated. You're like on a boardwalk. And so these simple sketches turned into this idea of how you would move through the space, what the planting started to look like, and what that would feel like. Because we're trying to carve out as much experience as possible in these 3 acres, and dealing with the grading and dealing with the idea of really making a beautiful space that everyone can share. So then those become more formalized. You start to really think about what they might feel like, get a lot of inspiration from many other projects in precedent. So this is taking that a little further with sketches. And these are the 3 different areas. And so again, the conifer area is really about creating this backdrop screen that feels, that screens the winds and also kind of creates unique spaces. Riparian is this cascading river feel of the plants have a very riparian feel. And then the meadow, which is called a meadow, it's not really meadow, it's perennial garden. They're all really gardens. But that idea that it has a lot of texture and that it nestles in the playground was very important. So I want to take you through quickly the meadow planting. So here we are in plan. And so there's our fountain, here's our lawn. And then this section is the meadow, what we call the meadow. It has a lot of grade change. You'll see how we did that. That's kind of fun. Right down here is the playground. We're on 59th Street here. This is 61st, and 60th comes all the way through. And so you start, when you do planting design, you start with kind of just like a kind of sketch of like, here's a big swath of this. Here we're going to add a lot of this. And so you jump to what we've been doing lately is really looking at it in 3D and rough rhino models and what that might look like. And really look at the landform and how what the sunshade is. And again, these are just very rough models. And then very important about thinking about the grasses and the color and what the seasonality is, really thinking about what role each plant has or what area and how they work together as a composition. And then start to do these kind of ideas of like, do we want to have big swaths of grass and then have pockets of color? And what does that mean? And how do you do that with the topography? So this is a new thing for us that we did was we started to build it in Rhino. And so really checking what the elevations are. And to me, it looks like light bright, but that might be just my age. It's really this fun idea of like where the color is and where the anchor, the importance of like the evergreen anchor and how it holds it together. And then where you have seasonal pops of color. And then really thinking about what the pathways look like and how these pathways kind of arch back. And so you can see the space, making sure that view, you know, all the important things about security and that views are very good and that you feel carved out. And then that all is translated back to AutoCAD. And then that's what this starts to look like. And then this is the AutoCAD drawing of the kind of entire meadow area, which was just one part of it. But that type of process of looking at some of those, and I tried to show you things that weren't perfect, the idea that you could really look at this in 3D and explore and then go back to changing some of the ideas about the plants to refine it. And so there's our meadow built. And so it does kind of act like with these pops of color. And this is in another season where it feels, you kind of feel very immersed and you feel like that this is your own little kind of meadow garden. People really love that. So, and so here is actually the view of the whole project. So that's the 60th Street corridor. You can see actually Columbus Circle way back there. And so that's the kind of plaza fountain, the water channel, and then that's a riparian fountain. But those are the conifer areas, and here is the meadow through here, and the playground. And so this view is looking east, and then this view is looking west. And so this idea of the western view, so that you're able to see, there's amazing sunsets there. One thing that I didn't mention is that the layout of the kind of grid is riffing off the kind of grid of Manhattan. So there's all these, one of the things that's really fun is, as landscape designers, as landscape architects, is to kind of create these clues of hidden kind of depth to your detailing, and that it kind of gives different narratives. Some, so people notice, some don't. But this is the idea of like how that grid starts and dissolves and then moves through. And so this is open and well loved now. I think I made it right almost time.